Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Ronan Murphy and I'm joined this week on the Transfers podcast extra by Uli Hesse, editor at Elf Freunde and author of over 10 football books, including histories of Borussia Dortmund, Bayern Munich and, of course, Tor, the story of German football. So Uli is the biggest brain in English language German football. So that's why we have him on this show. And he's a huge Borussia Dortmund fan.
Yeah, that much is true. That much is true. Hello, Ronan.
Hello.
Happy to be on the show.
Delighted to have you on the show. And this episode, we're covering the best and worst Borussia Dortmund transfers, because you're a long-time Borussia Dortmund fan. So probably in your supporting time is the players that we're covering. When did you become a Borussia Dortmund fan?
Well, I saw my first game at the ground in 1977 when it was shortly before my 11th birthday, but I'd been a fan before. Can't tell you an exact date. It's a family thing. My older brother was one of the guys who formed the very first supporters club.
Oh.
So, yeah, I said, it's a family thing.
Yeah, it's a family thing. A lot of our listeners and viewers probably have similar kind of family that their dad or their brother or their sister or mother supported the club before them, and they're to blame for years and years of suffering a lot of the time.
Yeah, quite often it's a very simple thing. I know tons of people who became fans of a certain club totally by accident. I don't know, they watched the team on television as kids and they liked the shirts or whatever, and suddenly you're stuck with it for the rest of your life with, I don't know, Grimsby Town. No offense taken, I hope. These things happen, yeah.
Yeah. I think computer games these days as well, FIFA and FC and Pro Evo and the likes of this.
Yeah, exactly. And these days also there's lots of people who become sort of fans of a club because of a player. They follow a certain player and then, get stuck with a club.
Yeah, so some of the players that we'll be listing now, particularly the worst Borussia Dortmund transfers in recent history, you wouldn't be stuck with the club if you had to follow those. But I think we'll start off with the best Borussia Dortmund players that you have chosen for us, and we'll start off with Stefan Chapuisat, who was a big player in the 1990s and helped Borussia Dortmund become the first German team to win the Champions League.
Yeah, I mean, I chose him because, most of the people who follow the club, they became, or let's put it this way, a lot of people became really fans of the club in the 90s because that was the first real successful period, apart from the very old days. And then Chapuisat was just a key player of that team. And we all adored him. Because he scored all those goals and because he was very soft-spoken. He always had tons of offers from other clubs, and he never left. And it's also because the story of his signing, which I think for a podcast like yours is quite interesting, because there were tons of coincidences. He was a good striker in his native Switzerland. He was a young, good striker. But back then, nobody really, took notice of what happened in Switzerland. So he signed with a German club who'd just been promoted to the Bundesliga by Uerdingen. I don't even know, what kind of money he signed for. So they go into the Bundesliga season and he needs a bit of time to adapt. But he's okay. He plays well. Then they play an indoor tournament during the winter break. And he suffers a serious injury and he's out for months. During that time, Bayer Uerdingen go into this, tail dive. They're in the relegation zone. At the same time, Dortmund are for some reason not doing very well. They're losing game after game. So at one point, people decide the old coach has to go. They're not threatened to be relegated, but it's a terrible season. So they say at the end of the season, somebody new will come in. And I also like this story because it was for Dortmund, it was the kind of season where that to break the spell, what we have to do is we have to play a team that's even worse than we are, And that was Bayer Uerdingen. So a couple of days before the end of the season, we play a game against Uerdingen at home. It's a terrible game. One team isn't very good. The other team isn't playing very well. So it was that kind of game. And There was one point where Chapuisat made sort of his trademark move, where he would drift towards the byline and wait for two defenders to appear. And then he would, cut in and run through them. And he did that. And we all thought, well, what was that all about? That's a good player, So we knew Bayer Oeding would be relegated. So we felt that, hey, maybe we can get him for cheap, So then at the same time, the new coach, Dortmund decided to sign, is Ottmar Hitzfeld, who had worked in Switzerland. So he knew Chapuisat. So as it happens, Bayer Oeding get relegated and nobody wants the player. He was even loaned out to Dortmund. He was loaned out with a clause that said you can have him for 2.5 million marks, which was, I think, 7 million pounds at the time. So it was ridiculous. And then he kept scoring goal after goal, and we won all those titles with him. So it's a combination of, the player, the story, the moment in time, all these things.
As well as the goals he scored for Borussia Dortmund. He won the Champions League, like I said. He won the Bundesliga twice. He won the Super Cup, and he won the Intercontinental Cup, which is a lovely looking trophy. I was in the Borussia Dortmund Museum before Christmas, and it's very nice up close. But he brought a period of success, and it's no surprise other teams were obviously looking for him. And another player that you've picked, the next player you've picked, was probably there for even shorter, but was part of that Champions League winning team. And he's known to our usual host and a big name on the Transfers podcast, Duncan Castles, is a fellow Scotsman.
Yeah, it's Paul Lambert. Is maybe I shouldn't have chosen him because it's sort of the same generation as Chapuisat, and us journalists like to be, bit more spread things around and give you more insight into different eras. But he was his story is also phenomenal, really. I mean, he joined Dortmund. At the end of the season, they win the Champions League. And the business manager said Lambert was the most important player on the team. It was a star-studded team and everything, but everybody felt that sort of Lambert made the difference, actually, which is great. And it's also, again, it's a story of the transfer. So, and I've chosen him because, to this day, you open Lambert's German, do you say Wikipedia?
Yes.
You open his Wikipedia article, and it says, it says there that Dortmund played Motherwell in the UEFA Cup. And Dortmund was so impressed with Lambert that they signed him 2 years later, which is untrue. Then again, I myself thought it would be like that. So back in those days, you just, it sounds crazy, but those were the days. You just went to the training ground, and as the players came off the ground, you said, hello, could we do an interview after you've showered and everything? And they would go, yeah, why not? Wait here. So that's what I did. I approached Lambert. He told me he would back, after showering and getting dressed and whatever. So he came back and we talked. And I think that was 5 or 6 months after he joined. And I was interested in this transfer. So I told him that, the club, they probably saw you, in the Motherwell game. And then ahead of the season, they needed a stand-in midfielder, in case of injuries and everything. And I suppose they approached you because you were out of a contract. And he said, no, that's not at all what happened. He said he was out of a contract at Motherwell and he felt he'd done well. He was a good player. So he said he literally sat by the phone and waited for Rangers or Celtic to call because he felt they must call. I'm on a free transfer. And nobody called until an agent from Holland called him and said, he basically said, listen, you're out of contract and everything. Have you signed anything? Lambert told him the story. He said, no, nobody's calling me. And he said, wait, I have an idea. I can get you a few trials in Europe. Let's see if this works out. And that's what he did. And he had a trial at Borussia Dortmund. Paul Lambert. He was signed on a trial, and it was only when he was really good during that trial. Then the club went back to the Motherwell game and they had a look at the tapes. And they said, okay, this guy, maybe he can help us. Why not? So then they signed him. And and he also became another great thing about this story is that because of all these things, he became a huge fan favorite, not just because of his style of play, but also because everybody knew he was sort of supposed to be a stand-in player. And suddenly he's a key player in the team and everybody loved him. And he he should have stayed at Borussia Dortmund a lot longer than he did, but his family wanted to go home. His wife was homesick, so he left fairly early.
Yeah. The family reason is the reason he went back to Scotland, and he had a hugely successful career, obviously, in Scotland, and he could have played in the Premier League. It wouldn't have been a surprise because he was one of the best players in Europe at the time. And the way he's talked about Borussia Dortmund, he's one of the international ambassadors or club ambassadors now, when he was only there for a season and a half, and he's still kind of regarded as an icon of the club. So
and he's a very decent, very, very decent man, very nice guy.
Yeah.
It was not easy for me as a fairly young reporter to talk to him because of his Scottish, dialect. Took a while to get used to that, but then we had a really good chat.
Yeah, I imagine it took him a while to get used to the German dialect as well when he was over there. I think I spoke to him before, and I think he was saying one of the first things that he learned was the equivalent of the Scottish man on. So to watch your back, that somebody's near you, that was the first thing.
Yeah,
the first thing he learned. Yeah,
in German, it's Hintermann.
Yeah. So the next player you picked on your list is more recent and has joined Borussia Dortmund twice, in fact.
Yeah, but I mean the first time around. The second time is, which maybe, well, you want to talk about Bellingham later, right? Because it's quite an interesting thing about the sort of transfers that Dortmund are doing these days, or we can talk about it in a minute. Well, yeah, it's Kagawa. I think that's how you pronounce it in English. Kagawa, Kagawa.
Yeah.
It's anyway.
Yeah, English Man United fans call him Shinji Kagawa. Yeah. But Japanese people are probably different.
It's another interesting case because it's another case where you would think that, or maybe these days it probably happens, that you've got huge scouting staff, and people know everything about every player everywhere. But even as recently as that, it wasn't the case, because there was a former Dortmund player called Thomas Scot. He played in the 80s, and he finished his career in Japan, and he became an agent. And through that combination, he had really good contacts in Japan. He knew a lot of people in Japan, and he knew a lot of players in Japan. And he was sort of trying to sell it, Kagawa. And he was actually offering him around the league. And again, I think he's another player who did a trial. And he was eventually signed for 350,000 euros, which is really ridiculous. And another thing why I picked this was, he was signed in 2010, I think it was. And I went to a pre-season friendly between Borussia Dortmund and Manchester City. That was shortly before the season began. It was in Dortmund. And it was just a pre-season friendly. And there was a bit of, a commotion on the Manchester City bench, because they just signed another bunch of players that very afternoon. And there were more people and more players than would fit on the subs bench. So you could see from the stands, it was really quite crowded. And of course, we all knew that City suddenly had all this money and they were signing all these players. And I think most people actually came because of City, to have a look at, who are these coming superstars. And then Kagawa ran rings around everybody. He was obviously the best player on the pitch. And we'd never seen him before. We thought, who's that guy? Who did we sign? I mean, this guy's fantastic. And then he became a key player of that club team, and that won the leagues rather sensationally. And he too is one of those players who became a fan favorite, even though, as far as I know, he never uttered a word in German. And it was just the kind of player that people love.
Yeah, those kind of magnetic players or exciting players that you just watch them to see what they will do. You're just waiting for them to produce that bit of magic. Yeah, he did that, and then Man United came calling. They spent 16 million on him, and then they sold him back to Borussia Dortmund for 8 million. So Borussia Dortmund made good money from.
Yeah, it was strange because it was this kind of story that seemed to be happening to the club. Well, through the last 10 years, we have a really good player. He does very well for us. He goes away for a lot of money to some other club. Doesn't play it well for whatever reason. We don't know. And then we get him back. This happened lots of time. I mean, we can talk about that later. Dortmund have become, we've garnered a bit of reputation, not only for finding, very young players and turning them into superstars, but we also have the reputation of, bringing players back after they've gone somewhere. Maybe in the romantic hope that it will be, the same the second time around. And it very rarely is. It happened with Götze, and then it happened with Şahin when he went to Madrid and then came back. And it worked out a little bit with Mats Hummels maybe, but it didn't really work with Kagawa the second time around, and so on. There's numerous examples. I don't know if this is a new club philosophy.
Well, if it worked once, it'll work again is a philosophy of many businesses, many industries, and many couples around the world. so maybe Borussia Dortmund is just they go out and play the field for a while and then come back to the one they love in the end.
Of course, in football, a couple of years make a lot of difference. That's. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, you see it at the moment with Jadon Sancho and how he came back to Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah. Oh yeah, here's another example. Of course, yeah.
Yeah, how he's kind of struggling to find his feet elsewhere. Yeah,
and of course, to tell you a joke, which is already old now, that we're also bringing Bellingham back, of course. Yeah, and then found out that he's the wrong one. Yeah,
I think
maybe we won't.
Bellingham Jr. might be just as good if you're to listen to Sunderland fans rave about him. They think he has a lot to offer, and maybe he is underrated by the fact that his name is Bellingham. If he was called something different, that people might pay more attention to him. So have to wait and see. Yeah,
that's an interesting twist. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, those were your best Borussia Dortmund signings, but your worst are very interesting. A few new ones, but one dating back to the 1990s, and he was African Footballer of the Year before he signed to Borussia Dortmund. He had fallen out a few times with Arsene Wenger, and there was an interesting story I read while preparing for this podcast that while at Monaco, he was set to join Reggiana in Italy, but his wife locked him in the house, so he couldn't sign on the dotted line because she was too fond of living in Monaco. But then he ended up at Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, she probably should have, well. I shouldn't joke about this because you'll find out in a minute why. I mean, there's again, I try to pick players who, just so they can talk about maybe various reasons why a transfer doesn't work. It happens so often that you sign somebody and think this just has to. For instance, I mean, I might digress a bit. A really great example is that during so many years of the Klopp era, we didn't really have enough money to add depth to the squad. So for all those years, or let's say for a couple of years, everybody at the club felt, or at least whoever worked for the club or supported the club, whenever we went to bed in the evening, we prayed for Robert Lewandowski to stay healthy. Because we knew if he's out for a couple of months, that's it. We don't have anybody who's... So, and the club, we always worked somehow, just Lewandowski stayed healthy. And then one season, they addressed all these problems. They signed Aubameyang, who didn't play up front at first. He was just a fantastically fast, he was a more deep-lying player. Then to add another sort of type of player, they signed Ciro Immobile, Serie A leading goal scorer. So we had Aubameyang, we had Immobile, we still had Lewandowski and everything. And it was perfect, nothing could go wrong. And then everything goes wrong. Everybody's injured. The team is suddenly, by January or February, I think, the team is in last place. it's a total disaster, and Klopp announces he will step down at the end of the season. And that was the sort of thing where at the beginning of the season, you looked at the squad and said, nothing can go wrong, But in football, there's, nothing is certain. Yeah, and it was sort of the case with Ikpeba because, like you said, he was African Footballer of the Year. We paid a lot of money for him at that time in the late 90s, 6 million euros. But everybody thought nothing can go wrong. And then the main story is, I don't know if this is really the main case, but his wife died. I think it was of cancer. I'm not quite sure. But his private life was in turmoil and he was never able to really perform for the club. So he's usually held up as one of those, biggest transfer flops, at least in that era. But of course, there's a backstory to it, and you never know, right? So it's
you don't know what's going on in someone's personal life, but I think even at the time on the pitch he kind of made things difficult for himself as well, because I think maybe his personal life, there's no way it cannot bleed into your professional life, and he gave an interview to Bild, which didn't go down well with the club at the time, and he was just very frustrated. Yeah,
it was just one of those big signings where a lot of things go wrong, and we have two more of those. Or at least one more of those, because you want to introduce them? Or
the other ones, obviously on the pitch was where all the problems came, and Nico Schulz is your next one. And when he signed, I remember 25.5 million for Hoffenheim, it seemed a good deal. I suppose a lot of players left Hoffenheim at that time and had been kind of come along a long way, and it kind of was expected that Nico Schulz would just continue his Hoffenheim form at Borussia Dortmund, but never happened.
The thing about his signing is that he was an expensive player, but he turned into a really expensive player because, again, we felt that it was a really, really good deal. I think they paid 25 million for him, and he was a left back. We needed a left back. He was an international. He was playing for Hoffenheim. He was fast. He was good, and then he was just not able to, for whatever reason, to perform for Dortmund. And then he just stayed, He was in the squad for years. I think 4 years. 4 years, I think 4 years. Until they finally, and it was not even that the contract had run out. It would have gone on even longer. They just, I don't know what's the term in English. They just dissolved the contract and paid him a lot. So they paid 25 million for him. Then they pay him 6 million every year for not playing. Then there was a major, well, it wasn't major, but it was some sort of scandal having to do with domestic violence. So he was accused of domestic violence, and suddenly there was that as well. He was, he wasn't even training with the team. It was a complete disaster. It was a complete disaster transfer, and it went on for years and years and years. So he was at club for 4 years. I don't even know how many games he played. But I think somebody had told me that all in all, this cost the club around the tune of 65 million euros. Which is
I mean, these days €1 million a game is what that adds
these days, and well, it's not the sort of sum that it would have been 20 years ago, but for a German club, it's an enormous amount of money. That's
Yeah, and then he obviously his contract was dissolved, like you said, and he was unattached for a year before he found a new club. So that kind of
it's not because you haven't played for many years. Then because of this thing that I just mentioned, your reputation is basically ruined. So where do you go? What do you do? It was a disaster.
Yeah, in his last season, he didn't even play a second under Terzic. So that was not a good end to his career. And the next player was another huge. Massive name on Borussia Dortmund signed him. He had played for Chelsea already, and he came from Wolfsburg, where he had some success. Again, more money, 30 million, and he didn't do a lot, and now he doesn't even play football anymore.
Yeah, and he's probably well known in England because, probably not well known, but I think he had a couple of loan spells in England. And Andre Schürrle was another. There was another transfer where people were quite skeptical. when we made it, in contrast to the Nico Schulz transfer, for instance, because Schürrle had been very promising as a very young player, and of course he will forever be famous in Germany for giving the cross that won, for Götze goal that won the World Cup. But there were a lot of people who felt that he was quite expensive and hadn't really been, sort of super player that would warrant that kind of money. But Thomas Tuchel came in. Thomas Tuchel was Dortmund coach at the time, and he'd coached André Schürrle when he was at Mainz. So we felt he must know what he's doing because he knows the player. And you often, another thing that often happens with players is I only have a few examples you won't know, but the players work under certain coaches, but not for other coaches. Who knows why? I don't know. But this happens. And we thought that the transfer doesn't make much sense for us, but maybe he's one of those players who'd suddenly explode and be the old Schürrle again because he's playing for Tuchel. But he didn't. And I don't know. The explanation most usually given was that he's the kind of, because of his pace, he's the kind of player who needs some room in front of him. And according to, and because of, the tactical setup and everything, and Dortmund being a big club at the time in the Bundesliga, usually teams would play very deep and we had a lot of possession and pass the ball around, but not really, wouldn't be able to create any room on the wings. So he couldn't really function in that team. Yeah, which is certainly part of the story. I don't know what else happened, but he was another very expensive signing that we made and that didn't work out.
Yeah. And then, age 29, he announces his retirement.
Yeah.
Surely you can't be serious, but he was. Yeah, he's no longer playing. In 2020, he hung up his boots, and he said at the time that he wasn't enjoying playing football. And
I was going to say that at the time, he was the most expensive player in club history, according to most sources. I'm not quite sure because at the same time, I think roughly around the same time, we signed Dembele. And I'm not sure exactly how much money we paid for Dembele. There are rumors that we actually paid more for him than we did for Schürrle. But of course, as you said, it's a major difference if you pay that for an 18-year-old, very, very talented kid, or for, a player who's coming off a couple of, good but not great seasons.
Yeah, and Borussia Dortmund made a lot of money selling Dembele in the end.
Dembele, yeah. Oh, yes. That was, what a deal. I think it was sold for 105 million, plus all those bonus payments, for if he breaks through at Barca, if he has a certain number of games, if he wins trophies, which he did. So I don't even know what this ultimately came to, but it must have been really a lot.
I hope when they were selling him, they included the Ballon d'Or clause, but didn't say which club he might win it at.
Might be.
Yeah, so
that would be funny. Like 10 years on, you get a letter saying, "Hey, you guys still owe us, I don't know, 5 million or whatever." Yeah.
So that was our best and worst Borussia Dortmund signings of recent years, and thanks very much, Uli, for choosing those for us. They've been very entertaining, and we really enjoyed your digressions on each.
You can edit them all.
No, I will edit. I will edit none. You've been listening to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, please follow, share, and rate us. Your support helps us bring you more news, analysis, and insight. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter and Blue Sky address is at TransfersCast. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music is by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
We did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and wasn't known for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.